So I really want to make another tier list for the weapons, and one thing I really want to specify with this one is that this is going to be about the pro scene specifically, whether it be the pro hubs or Ape Squad tournaments or the majors themselves, which be official embark tournaments. Now, this isn't going to apply directly to people who are solo queuing in gold or bronze or even ruby or whatever. This is meant to be around the pros specifically, which tends to be around 3 stacks. So this is going to be a little bit different than what you might experience in game. So I do want to make sure that you guys understand that going into it. And the way I'm treating each tier is S tier is going to be something that I would consider hard meta. This would be something that you 100% can bring in and it will be a viable pick, with a caveat that maybe some maps it might not be the best, but it is 100% in the meta. A would be something that is a viable pick within the meta, but might be a little bit more niche, or maybe it is a very map specific thing, like it only works on a few maps or a few specific team comps. B would be something that I think is relatively viable within the meta, but isn't quite good enough to reach that sort of pro meta. C is something that is out of the meta, and D is something that is very far from ever being viable within the pro scene. Now, first we're gonna start off with heavy. We're gonna go down this list. Now, for heavy, there is one that I want to start with first, which is the BFR Titan. Now, this one is something that I would consider hard meta, but as a caveat, this is not allowed in the majors. This and the P90 are both banned from the majors. It was also banned in the closed qualifiers, and during open qualifiers, it wasn't even released. So even though I think it would be the meta, I think this was what people would be running very often. I'm putting it in S tier, but just know that it is not quote unquote meta because, well, it's banned. Next, we have the Deagles. I'm putting this in A tier. Now, the thing about Deagles is their TTK is actually not that good, but it becomes significantly better every headshot that you hit. And the thing with the Deagles is that there is a very, very slight bloom. So if you were to spam it over and over again, the bullets just kind of disperse a little bit away from that point. So being extremely pinpoint accurate can be a little bit difficult. Often you have to pace your shots, and at that point you're lowering your TTK and your overall DPS by a little bit. So for me, I think it's just a little bit too niche to be quite in a S tier as like the hard meta, but I think it's still extremely viable, and it offers heavies a really solid long range option, especially with the BFR out of the game. I think if the BFR was in the game, it would just completely outclass these weapons in the pro scene. But since they can't use the BFR, you see a few Deagles here and there, especially on stuff like Skyway or Bernal, where they might be holding these very long engagements. Next, we have the minigun. Now, this is in B tier. I think this is actually a very solid weapon, and I think it actually counters a lot of the things that people are currently using in the meta. The biggest problem is winch. The way that winch works is that it is a stun. So when it locks onto somebody, it stuns them, pulls them in, and that stun duration is based on how far away you get winched. So if you get winched at the max distance, you get a longer stun. So if you are using minigun and you are right next to somebody with winch, this isn't going to interrupt your spool. But if you are further away, it will sort of reset your spool a little bit to the point where you have to wind it up again, meaning that the current meta kind of is a counter to the minigun. However, I've still been able to get winched and kill people even in ranked, and in some scrims I've even brought it out and had some relatively decent success, but it just isn't as reliable because of the fact that winch is in the meta. So I think if winch gets nerfed, you will see the minigun pop into A and S tier. Next, we have the Shack. Shack would be in S tier. This is definitely a hard meta pick. You can use it on any map in any team comp, and it is very good and reliable. It's pretty good at close range. It absolutely shreds, adds some insane TTKs. And the further you go away, it might not be the best, but versus an SA-12, you can still do a decent amount of damage at the medium to even some long range. It has a relatively easy recoil to control. The only thing is that you do reload quite a bit, but if you are very accurate with it, you can make very good use of those 20 shots, and the Shack is definitely in the meta. The KS-23, I'm putting in B tier. Now, the KS-23 and the BFR Titan are actually pretty similar in terms of TTKs and stats and a lot of other things. There's a few similarities. Even if you were to learn the way that the bullet works, where it sort of hit scan up into a certain point and then turns into a projectile, and you have really good accuracy with it, the fall off is just so bad in comparison to BFR Titan that you're not really making any use of it at these longer ranges. It really has to be up close, and since a lot of things sort of interrupt the animation and you still have to sort of cock the gun back, a lot of people who use it tend to use a gadget swap cancellation. So they'll basically swap to one gadget, then swap back to this in order to cancel that animation. To shoot it either a little bit faster or to just, cancel that animation after they melee so that they don't have to cycle it. Overall, giving you a bit of a better DPS. This is a pretty mechanically intense weapon, and I think there are a lot of situations where this is good, and there are a lot of different players throughout the pro scene and at least competitive scene in general that made pretty good use of it. But when it comes to the hard meta, it's just not quite there, and it gets so heavily outclassed by the BFR Titan in terms of how reliable it is and how it combos with stuff, and the BFR Titan being able to basically land a guaranteed headshot after winching people just makes it so much stronger with the current meta of winch, whereas the KS, you have a longer cocking animation and it makes it a little bit trickier to do all these things, and there's no headshot multiplier, so for the most part it just is outclassed, and that's why it's in B tier. Next we have Spear. Spear is going to go in D tier. There have been a few people who have brought this out in some competitive games, whether it be tourneys, pro hub, stuff like that, but it has never really performed that well. There's been some people who do okay with it, but the thing is, a lot of the way that this weapon works is relying on bugs and sort of, quote unquote exploits. Now, I don't think these are like bannable offenses, but there are animation cancels and there are certain tricks that you can do with winch and the right click and emoting and stuff like that in order to make this a little bit more effective. And once you have sort of gotten to that point, it can be okay, but it just gets so heavily outclassed by the rest of the meta. And when you're facing a coordinated 3-stack, they very often know how to play into this and can completely shut you down. Next is the M60. I think this actually belongs in B tier. The TTK on this is actually pretty solid. It has very easy to control recoil. It just has a really aggressive kick at the beginning, and then after that it becomes a laser beam. So you can just absolutely laser people's heads. But if you ever face a shack, the shack will just shred you every time. The shack has a much better DPS than this, and for the most part the M60 gives you really good sustain throughout fights. So if you are able to survive the initial burst, if you get sustained through your heals from your teammates and you can just keep shredding, then the M60 will definitely reward you for doing so. But I find the issue with the M60 is the overall damage just doesn't feel that significant. So in a meta where you have a lot of people just poking really hard with CB01, maybe even like bursting with SA12, it just feels like that DPS is a little bit too slow. So if you can get the sustain and if you can have a fight last a little bit longer than, most fights do in the pro scene, the M60 will definitely shine in those situations. But there just seems to be better options and more reliable playstyles. I think you really need to build a team comp around this and make sure that everybody is sort of on the same page in order to make something like this shine. Next we have the MGL. This is going in D tier. I don't even think I've ever seen this in a pro tournament. It just isn't there yet. Maybe there's some players who could make it work, but I haven't seen it happen yet. The SA12 is an S tier pick. This is one of, if not the most popular weapon in the scene currently. And in the recent pro hub matches, we've seen that the BFR actually took over a little bit up until, it got banned and people stopped using it. But the SA12 has almost always been a dominant pick in this game, and it still is one of the best weapons in the game. And it has a very high skill cap, which is why a lot of the pros tend to use it, because once you have fully mastered it, it shines so well. Next, we have the Sledge. This is actually going into C tier. There are a few pro teams who are actually making this work. The one issue that comes with this is oftentimes the team has to build around it. So if you have a Sledge on your team, you very often need other things that work with it and synergize with it, with your medium and your light, or whatever team comp that you're bringing. And that is where the issue arises. It's not necessarily that the Sledge is the problem and things that work with the Sledge are the problem. It's everybody else having to build around it that ends up hindering your team, because then you're not bringing a lot of these quote unquote meta picks, meta gadgets, meta weapons in order to contest all the other people running it. You're kind of bringing stuff just to help this out a little bit, and that ends up making the team lack a little bit. So it's not necessarily the problem with the weapon, it's the problem with how to make the weapon work. Next we have the Flamethrower. This is also going in C tier. Now, there have been a few pros who have used this in some scrims, in tournaments and stuff, and had relatively good success. And I think the thing with this is that it can counter the goo. Like, there is so much goo in the current meta, so it has that niche that actually is very viable right now. But the DPS on it and the overall, like, ability to just like 1v3 and play into a lot of other teams is just not quite there. It has some good potential with the whole 1v3 when it comes to people all clumped together, especially if you are defending a cash out. This shines quite well. But when you're on the offense, you just can't reach them very often. You just can't reach them. Even with the SA-12, it's like you still have that range where you can kind of hit them a little bit further out. But with this, you really need to get close. And if enemies know that you're running this, they can kite really well, and you're not going to do much. Next, we have the Lewis gun. So I'm going to put the Lewis gun at, probably the back of B. It's pretty close to M60. I don't want to put them away from each other, but it's just not quite as good as the M60, but I don't really think it's as bad as some of the things that are in C tier. This needs a little bit of love. It does have some pretty good range, so it can be a replacement for something like the Deagles or the BFR, but for the most part, with the recoil being so difficult to control, even pros are going to struggle a little bit with some of these little hiccups there, and missing those 1 or 2 bullets can be a big difference in a pro setting. The TTK also isn't even that much better than the M60. It only actually gets better at the further ranges, but the closer ranges, the M60 just wins. So easier recoil, more bullets, more damage per mag, easier to control recoil. Obviously, the M60, in my opinion, just seems to outshine the Lewis by a little bit. Now, if you were to be perfectly accurate with both these weapons, like if there was no recoil, then the Lewis might be a little bit better, just because the TTKs are so close that I think once you get into those longer ranges, being a little bit more reliable with the weapon could be nice. But since we have to take in the human factor here, the M60 just wins by a little bit. All right, now to cover medium. So medium actually has had a bit of a shakeup, and in ways that I was a little bit confused by, because there's certain things that are now in the meta that haven't really been touched. So we'll get into that in a bit. Now, to start off, we're going to just cover the P90. Like I said, this was banned, but I'm actually going to put this in B tier. I don't think it is quite good enough to be in the, hard meta thing, but I also am not 100% sure if it even would be. Since it has been banned, people obviously aren't using it much because they want to practice what they have to play in the majors. We have seen it a little bit in the pro scene when it was allowed, and it doesn't do too bad, but because of the fact that we don't get to see it enough, I feel like it's really hard for me to even say if it's an A or an S tier, but there are people who do really well with it. I'm going to put it in B, but I'm putting it here as I'm not 100% sure because this just doesn't have enough playtime in the pro scene. All right, now we're going to cover AK. So AK is something that's very interesting because I feel like for the most part, this has been sitting somewhere around here, A, B, C in most seasons, and it hasn't really been in the meta. But the reality is that this is in the meta. This is an S tier pick. And remember, I want to specify this again, that S tier is not necessarily like OP. This is just something that is, a hard meta where you can reliably run this in almost any map and almost any situation. It has semi-decent range. It has good damage per magazine. And that specific stat right there, the damage per magazine, is why this is becoming such a meta. We are in a sustain meta. Everybody is just healing and healing and healing. And what you need to do to rip through that is more bullets. So for that reason, the AKM is in S tier at the current moment because it is extremely reliable and you can use it in almost all scenarios. Now, the Model 1887 is going to go into C tier. I think the Model 1887 it's definitely fallen from its graces, but it's honestly not that bad. I've seen it used by some people, but it just feels like with the way that everybody seems to be playing with this sustain and sitting back on rooftops and trying to beam people, it makes it really hard to utilize shotguns, especially as the medium who tends to want to sit back a little bit further from the team than the rest of them and just sort of sit behind. Like, you probably don't want to bring a shotgun, but if you play into this, if you are more of an aggressive medium, the Model 1887 is not that bad. Now, the FAMAS, again, is going to be an S tier. There's a lot of things that are going to kind of sit around here, but the FAMAS is just really good. It tends to be more of the close range pick, but it also has a really strong retention of damage up to a pretty long range, has really easy to control recoil, and for the most part is just super reliable on almost all maps and in a lot of situations. So very good pick right there. Now, the dual blades, these go in D tier. They just don't really do much for the team. They're kind of a joke. If you're going to bring a melee on medium, the riot shield's a little bit better, but this goes in C tier because, again, a lot of pros know how to counter these things, and all the tricks in the book with riot shield probably isn't going to be enough to burn through 3 good players that know how to kite and play it into your melee pick. So I'm putting that in C tier. Next, we have the CL40. This is going to go into C tier as well. Again, just people know how to counter these things. Just, place a jump pad, get up. There are some APS turrets in the meta, so if they know that you're bringing this in a 3v3 or something, they're probably going to just bring in APS and counter you pretty quickly. And if they want to brawl you and get really close, like, you are probably just going to end up damaging yourself with this thing. So again, CL40 it just doesn't really match up. Now the revolver is something I want to put in A tier. I think that this might potentially be an S tier, but the main reason I'm putting it in A tier is because it's outclassed by something else, which we'll get to in a bit. But it does have a lot of things that you would want in the current meta. Either burst or sustained damage is what we are looking for. So something that has a lot of damage per magazine is a little bit more valuable this season. And the next thing is things that do a lot of upfront damage. So things like the CB01, the BFR, even RPG if we want to look at gadgets. And the revolver is kind of doing that too. We've also saw a little bit of a surge of the LH1 and the 93R, because these things that just do these like instant burst damage become really reliable right now, because you can focus fire someone and kill them so fast that they don't even have time to get healed. So you're countering a lot of their heals by just instantly bursting them. And the revolver kind of does that. If you can land a headshot with this thing before entering a fight, you are basically just ending that fight right away. You can almost instantly one-tap a light, so all you need is any little bit of damage followed up from your team. But this has a 2x headshot multiplier, and if you have really good aim, which a lot of these pros do, you can make really good use of this. And a lot of pros are using this in scrims right now. I think EU was the first scene to start to use this within the EU and NA scene. But special surprise, the Korean scene was actually the first to start doing this, and there is a player specifically called Gunhee who has been using this for a very long time. And if you've seen the FN Esports bundle, they have a revolver skin there because he is so well known for having used this revolver for so long and having so much success. So slowly this meta has trickled down to us, and it is shining right now. I think that this could potentially be an S tier pick, but I'm putting in A tier because it is relatively new to the current meta, and it's here with relatively no changes, which is interesting. Next, we have the Pike. I'm putting this in B tier. After the nerfs, I think it is a bit of an average weapon right now. I don't think it's a hard meta or a really strong pick, but it does synergize well with the rest of what we're currently doing in the meta, which is this long-range sustained poke. This shines here. So I'm putting it in B tier, but it does get outclassed by some other stuff we're going to talk about, like this, the CB01. And the CB01 is going to be an S tier. The CB01 repeater is really, really strong right now. I think this could potentially be one of the best picks on the class, but the CB01 is definitely a menace right now. And even in close range, you can use this quite well. It's pretty reliable for the most part across all the maps. But I do find when it comes to some of these close range maps, you're seeing a little bit more of the FCAR and the FAMAS, maybe even the AK as well. But I feel like if you like these sort of poke single fire weapons, it seems to be a lot of those people opt for the revolver in close range and the CB01 in long range. So it's those two weapons that they bounce between because they have a similar playstyle, versus people who like the tracking weapons, they kind of bounce between the AK, the FAMAS, and the FCAR, which is the next weapon we have here, which is FCAR. So we're going to put this also in S tier. So the FCAR has some of the better TTKs across the assault rifles of the class, but the problem is it doesn't have the best damage per mag. So this is very much so if you are focus firing with your team and if you have insane accuracy, then the FCAR is really good. There's a few people in different regions who use this, and they use it to very good success. And I think medium is the one that might be a little bit of a shocker for some people here. But the main thing I want to get across here is that this is not looking at just specifically NA or just specifically EU or just Korea or Asia or whatever. This is kind of covering all the pro scenes, all the studying that I've done for the pro scene of different regions, and concluding what is having the most success, what is getting picked up the most, and this is sort of where we're at in the current meta. Next, we have the Cerberus. This is going to go into C tier. I think this is on par, maybe a little bit worse than the Cerberus, or the Model 1887, sorry. So I think it belongs in the same tier as it. That's a bit of an overview of the current meta for medium. There does seem to be a good amount of viable picks, and it seems like a lot of people only opt for, say, FAMAS or the CB01, which I think these first two are definitely the most reliable, the FAMAS and the CB01. But the AK and the FK are definitely really strong, and if you look at the EU scene, you definitely see a lot more of these tracking weapons versus the burst or single shot weapons. So I'm sure a lot of people in NA are probably going to be a little bit confused by these picks, but like I said, this is to cover all the regions in their pro scene. And last we have Light we're going to look at, and there is nothing banned on this class. The only things that were banned were the P90 and the BFR, which are new, so that is kind of their logic or reasoning behind their ban here. But let's get right into it with the Sniper. This is actually going in C tier. I don't think that this is D tier, only because of the current meta, where it's a lot of, like, you know, rooftops and long range sustain and poke. I think the Sniper actually is not too bad in this current meta, but it's just still not good enough. The weapon itself is not the best, but at least the current playstyle seems to play into it a little bit more, so we're seeing a little bit more of it. But in the pro scene specifically, I think I've only seen it like once or twice. Next we have the throwing knives. I'm going to put these in C tier as well. There's only like 1 or 2 people I've seen use this, and you do have to be pretty mechanically gifted to use these because of the timing and how they work. There's a lot of things to kind of like play into. Now, they can be a little bit easy in some situations where you can just spam left click, but people who are mastering this in the pro scene definitely know how to use their right click, and they have really good accuracy. They understand the projectile, so definitely a difficult pick to use, but in the right hands can do some work. Next we have the M11. So this goes in S tier. A lot of people actually really like this as a weapon for all situations, all maps. It does have better close range than long range, but the drop off isn't too crazy that people can still do some pretty decent beams at long range. And there's a lot of players that are pretty well known for this and main this weapon. So this is definitely a hard meta pick. Next we have the M26 Matter. This is going to go into A tier. I think that this is a pretty solid weapon for some maps. So this is more of a niche pick that can really shine. I think stuff like Las Vegas, for example, is a really solid one. If you want to play into those buildings and just force a lot of close range fights, you can get really good use out of the Matter. Next we have the ARN 220. Definitely an S tier pick. This is good on all maps and all situations. It obviously is better at long range than close range, but because of those 60 bullets, you can just hose down people up close. And if you're playing into your heavy and your medium very well, then you can kind of dip in and out of fights and just have really good sustained damage throughout it. So for me, the ARN is an easy S tier pick. The Dagger, probably going to be in D tier. I don't think I've seen anybody outside of like KOL even try to put this in the competitive scene, but I just haven't really seen anybody succeed with it. I think that there's probably some players who could do it. I think KOL is definitely one that could, but I'm just not really seeing it at the current moment. So for that, I'm putting it in D tier. Next we have the 9.3R, definitely an S tier pick. This is the weapon that I think a lot of people consider the strongest weapon on the class. I think it is obviously situational when this is stronger versus the other ones. For me, I would use the ARN over the 9.3R in almost all situations just because it suits my aiming style a little bit better. But the 9.3R is definitely something that everybody in the competitive scene knows is really strong. Next we have the Sword. I'm actually going to put this in C tier. I think it is a little bit better than D. And the thing about Sword is because of some of the changes that it's had, it's sort of lost a lot of its skill gap. Like, it's not as mechanically as intensive as it used to be. And it feels a little bit more simple to use than what it used to be. So people who are really gifted at the mechanics of this are no longer rewarded for that. So for me, the Sword is just sort of fallen a bit back. It feels a little bit easier to use. Like, I can pick it up and probably use it a little bit easier than I could use the older one. But because of these limitations, I don't think people can push it far enough to get into the pro scene. But there have been a few people that I've seen, even in closed qualifiers, that did really well with this. So I think the Sword, if you want to master it and play into it specifically, and this becomes another issue with some of the other melee weapons we've talked about before, is trying to make this Sword work means that your teammates are going to have to play into that, maybe pick up specific gadgets and play into specific loadouts in order for the Sword to shine a little bit more, which then hinders them because they're not playing into the meta. So that's sort of the issue that I see a lot with melee right now, is the way to make it work means that you kind of have to make other things not work or hinder yourself in other ways. But I think if people want to like really push it and master it and have a team that knows how to play into the Sword, then I could see this shine a little bit more. Next we have the LH1. I'm putting this in A tier. I think this could potentially be an S tier pick. Like, it's definitely more reliable than the Matter here. But the thing about it is, if you don't land the headshots, it just feels like it's a little lackluster. And if you get into close range, it again can feel a little bit hard to control. So I think this is one of those weapons that's very difficult to use, but in the right hands could be very, very strong. We just don't have a lot of LH1 players. For the most part, everything in S tier is picked a lot more than the things below it. But there are a few people who use LH1 to really good success, and I think it has the potential to go to S tier if people want to sit there and actually master it. But as it stands in the pro scene, I would put it in A tier. Now for the bow, I'm going to put this in C tier. There's only like one person that's really using this, and that's Peripherals. I did use it when I was competing, but since I'm a coach, obviously I'm not really competing much anymore, and I just kind of play whatever my team needs. And I've also swapped over to heavy a lot. So the only person in the pro scene currently using this that I even know of is Peripherals. And he does quite well with it. But again, it just feels like there's other things that just are more reliable or have more situations where they're good. Bow has a few situations where it shines really, really well. And obviously I'm a huge fan of this. I would like to see it. I would usually put this in like B tier for a regular thing, but for the pro scene specifically, this just kind of belongs a little bit lower. Nobody's really using it besides Peripherals. Next we have the V9S. This is going into D tier. Actually, nah, maybe C tier. While on paper it has pretty good TTKs, it drops off really fast, and the thing is you have to sustain your damage. There's been a lot of really insanely good aimers like Uni who have pushed this to its limits and had relatively okay success, but basically just went back to everything that's in S tier. Everybody that's sort of tried to push this in the comp scene because statistically it looks amazing just ends up dropping it. It's just a weapon that you have to press your buttons very, very fast, basically. Like, you just got to click really fast and you can get some decent DPS, but trying to track and stay perfect at a very close range with like a spam click thing just doesn't synergize well. If this was a full auto thing, this would probably be an A tier. But the fact that there is the human element where you have to spam click and track somebody very, very close because it has such a close range strength, then that's kind of why we see this as such a low tier pick at the moment. It's just the things that make it what it is kind of contradict each other in terms of a human element. I would love to see this be a full auto. Like, if you could just add an attachment that makes it full auto and then you don't have a sight, then maybe this could be something that people actually use. Because like I said, on paper, it looks amazing, but people cannot use it in the pro scene. Like I said, some people have tried, but it just always falls flat. Next, we have the SH. I'm actually putting this in B tier. There have been a few picks for this in the pro scene, but the M26 Matter is just way more reliable. Like, the Matter just has more sustained damage. It can do a lot more in terms of poke and run, whereas the SH, it's sort of this all-in, and then you have to reload. So versus a good team, you might get picked off right after you get that one burst. If you can kind of go in and get the kill and then get out, then that seems pretty good, but the M26 Matter can just keep pumping out damage. You don't really have to like get in and out quite as much. There's not this like, you know, go in, burst, and then get out and reload and then reset and do it again. A lot of these fights are sustained like we talked about before, so you really need to keep up your damage. So I think if you play into the SH like with your team and coordinate it, and you know, get somebody low, then somebody goes in for the first SH kill and then get out, I could see that being pretty decent. But since we're not really seeing it in the pro scene and people aren't really trusting as much, and if they do bring in a shotgun, it's always the Matter, I think I'm just going to put it in B tier. But it does seem to perform a little bit better than everything below it, and it does have a higher pick rate than everything in C tier. Next we have the XP. I don't know if it belongs in C tier or in B tier. Maybe B tier. I feel like overall it feels more comfortable in B tier, but in terms of like pick rate and how often people are using it, this thing is probably closer to like a C tier. But it is the worst of the like auto weapons or burst weapons in the class, so everything in S tier just outshines the XP. If you look at it in terms of DPS, whether it be like close range, medium range, long range, whatever, the XP has something that it is outclassed by. It sort of is like a jack of all trades, master of none. But the thing about it is it really does just feel like a pea shooter. At all ranges, it just feels like a pea shooter because you always know that there's something that would have killed faster or would have done better than it at whatever range you're fighting. But I still love this weapon. I like MP5s in games, so I still use it quite often. But in reality, this thing is just heavily outclassed by most of the weapons here. And if we look at just specifically pro picks and pro use cases of this, it's probably going to be something like the C tier, but it doesn't really feel right putting it there. So I'm putting it in B tier. I feel a little bit more comfortable there. So if you're interested in more content on the finals, feel free to subscribe. If you want to come chat live, you can check me out live on Twitch. Try to stream every day of the week and sometimes weekends. In the description, I'll have a link to the Finals University. If you want to come to that Discord, you can get some education. I try to keep it up to date with a lot of relevant information, and it's a good place to meet other people who are like-minded and who want to improve at the finals. So if you want to be like the pros, pick things that are in S or A tier, and I will see you in the finals. Drop down and steal, drop down and steal. You guys have cover there. You gotta got a tree cover.
Get on.
I got it, but I'm in the tree. I'm in the tree. This is so awkward. I think I got it.
Wait, this is crazy. What? Wait, it's
That's
in the...
insane.
What?